Democrats. Today is Thursday, April 27th, and it's time for the Chair's Daily Live. Happy Thursday. So it is a happy Thursday. I am fresh from the Leading Ladies event where we honored Tamaya Cox-Torre and Sarah Adams for the wonderful things that they do in our state. If you were there, I'm glad that I got. If you weren't, I hate that you missed it. But we do have another event coming up. You may have heard that the convention is June 4th, June 3rd and 4th in Tulsa, Oklahoma. June 3rd and 4th, that is a Saturday and Sunday. We're having breakout sessions, a star-studded breakout sessions, ending the evening with Beto O'Rourke being our keynote speaker at the Carl Albert Gala. And then on Sunday, the 4th, is when we do the business of updating our Constitution and bylaws, electing officers, and setting the tone for the next 2 years for the Oklahoma Democratic Party. You don't want to miss it. That is June 3rd and 4th in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Go out to our website, okdemocrats.org, for more information and to buy your tickets. All righty. So the governor was super busy last night. Just vetoing stuff left and right. Just veto last night. Bills that made it through the House and Senate and made it to his desk. And he took out his veto pen. I think it's a special pen. He took out his veto pen and vetoed all manner of things. And then he announced that he's going to veto everything that comes out of the Senate unless they give him his voucher scheme. And I'm calling it a scheme. I'm calling it vouchers. Maybe it's a tax credit, but whatever. He's going to veto everything until he gets his way. He's going to hold his breath until he gets his way. That's not how democracy is supposed to work, right? The House and the Senate are made up of elected people from all over the state. Now, we all know that there is no balance there. But that's who represent our state legislature, right? People who are elected from all over the state. They're supposed to go and confer with their constituents, come together, write bills that affect everyday people, make a compelling case for their chamber in the legislature. And when it moves over to the other chamber, it should have been debated out enough so the other chamber understands what it is. It gets voted on. Things that pass through the House and Senate should just go to the governor to make sure it's not a violation of the Constitution and make sure it doesn't steer us off too far of, where we want to go. And the governor's supposed to sign stuff. This governor said, nope, I'm in charge and I'm going to veto stuff because until I get what I want, you get nothing. Until I get what I want, this one thing that is a huge thing that veers us off of our Constitution. But because he wants this one thing, he's going to take everything else that they've worked to do. Now, that's not saying I agree with all the stuff that they've worked to do, but this is not how a democracy is supposed to work. Until he gets his vouchers, until he gets the coupon for rich families, he's going to hold the rest of us hostage. Let me give you an example of one of the things that he's holding hostage. He's ending the OETA. He's basically saying, I'm not going to fund OETA. OETA is a state network of PBS member TV stations serving the state of Oklahoma. So OETA is all the little PBS stations that run Sesame Street, the Oklahoma News Report, Finding Your Roots, that station. And, depending on what part of the state it is, it tells you what channel. He ended the funding for that. He said, I just don't think they're going to be around for a while. They're going to be around, so let's just end it. It's Oklahoma Educational Television. That's what OETA stands for, Oklahoma Educational Television. He's ending the funding for Oklahoma Educational Television. I think that should tell you a lot about where the governor's head is. Unless he can control the conversation about education, he doesn't want anyone to have it. And then there's his acolyte, the superintendent of public instruction, who said that DEI is the greatest threat to our country. I feel like he doesn't, I feel like he doesn't really know what DEI stands for, except that I know that he does. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the greatest threat to our country is making sure that everyone has a shot and that everyone is included in the conversation. Once again, I have to say, I don't think they understand how democracy works. So on top of that, a bill just passed out of the House that requires all schools to report on how they're fighting diversity, equity, and inclusion. It made it through the House and the Senate. How they're fighting diversity, equity, and inclusion. I cannot, when I hear those words, I'm struggling to hear what is wrong with celebrating diversity. What is wrong with setting up systems to ensure or to facilitate equity? Who can be against inclusion? So what does he want? Homogeneity and exclusion? I don't have to even say whatever the opposite of equity is, right? Homogeneity and exclusion. So if you don't look like the majority, if you don't worship like the majority, you don't think like the majority, there is no place for you in our education center system, or actually, according to Walters, in our country. It's dangerous, folks. It is incredibly dangerous. I'm putting together sort of a little longer show to talk about what is happening in our education system. Let me take that back. It's bigger than vouchers. It's bigger than anti-CRT, anti-diversity, equity, inclusion. Just remember, our rights are not static. Our rights are not static. And these are examples of how things that we thought were our rights are being stripped away by the majority, who only wants to include folks who are just like them. It's a little bit scary. I mean, I grew up in a time when America bragged about being a melting pot. And now it's sort of like we have a sifter trying to take out the parts that we don't like. And I probably shouldn't call myself part of the we, because I think I represent part of the parts that would be kicked out, wouldn't make it through the sifter. Last little news. And I I hate to be all negative now, but Senate Bill 694, which allows OG&E and ONG to raise rates unchecked and unapproved, is working its way through the House and Senate. They are entertaining a bill. I think that should have been DOA, should have been dead on arrival, should not have been a conversation. But they're entertaining a bill to allow Oklahoma National Natural Gas and Oklahoma Gas and Electric to set a rate and say that they're just going to raise our rates without having to come to us every time. It sucks every time they come to us, but at least we get a warning before our bill doubles and triples. With this, we won't have a warning. We will have adjusted to these crazy high bills that we're paying now. And then just out of nowhere, they'll raise again, and we won't have been warned. That's what they're fighting for. That's what they've had lobbyists over at the Capitol talking about, and it worked, because it started out as one bill and it's morphed into another bill, and it's working its way through our legislature. This is why we always have to pay attention. This is about utility bills. Everybody has utility bills. This is about utility bills, right? I've been talking about education. I've been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's a shame that the Republican Party, and yes, it is partisan, that the Republican Party has decided that those are dirty words, that diversity, equity, and inclusion are something that needs to be fighted. Woo, it needs to be fought. It's shameful, and they should be ashamed of themselves. But they apparently have worked this magic, sprinkled a little pixie dust, and made normal thinking people think that it's okay, that exclusion is the way that we want to go. Because that's what it means to fight inclusion, is to save and hoard the education for just some folks. Not make it so that everyone has access to education, and not make it for everyone to come as they are. You have to come in a certain way. That's what fighting diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like. It also looks like ending the funding for OETA, because OETA is an educational network that has educational programs about, the Civil War, Ken Burns' Civil War, but also finding your roots, and also programs on Indigenous peoples and African American and Hispanic folks. And perhaps that's too much diversity or too much inclusion. I'm not sure. But what the governor said was, he had questions about their viability, if they were going to make it in the long term. So let's not fund it. So for those who are keeping score, we're not going to fund OETA because we don't know if it's going to be around. We're not going to fund the interagency council on homelessness because, there's still homeless people. What can we do about it? If he doesn't like a thing, instead of doing a study, instead of coming up with a solution, he just decides to bury it. We're not going to pay for it anymore. We're not going to talk about it anymore. And it doesn't exist. That's where we live, folks. And that's why it's important that we get involved. That's why it's important that if you're thinking about running for office, that you give us a call and let us talk to you about it. If you know someone who should be running for office, let us know so we can reach out to them. And if you hear someone having a conversation about how Democrats are ruining the world, set them straight, because that's not us. We're not the ones who are ending the funding for OETA. We're not the ones ending the funding for coming up with solutions for those experiencing homelessness. We're not the ones who are trying to hoard education for only a select few. We're not the ones who are trying to raise prescription drug prices. That's not us. Make sure that they understand that we are the ones who are fighting to shrink the cost of prescription drugs. We're the ones who are fighting so that every kid has access to well-funded public education. We're the ones who are making sure that no matter what your zip code, if you live in a rural community, you live in a city, you can get to a hospital and it not wreck your finances for the rest of your life. That's us. You don't have to be afraid to say that you're a Democrat, and you don't have to sit quietly as they spout nonsense, as they spout conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory about how Tucker had to be stopped because he was the only right one. Be a proud Democrat. Be the voice of reason. Because right now, in this moment, that's Democrats. We are the voice of reason. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back here Monday at 4:15. You guys have a great weekend.